I think India has shown great leadership in getting the community of nations together to agree on that declaration. Over the course of the G20, India has done a great job on its own image and branding. And I compliment the PM going on in the World Bank on the reform agenda. It starts from redefining the vision of the bank to not just be focused on poverty, although it's important, but to also include a livable planet, to set a path for the world. The world is watching. 80% of the world's GDP was sitting in the room. I'm quite optimistic looking at the body chemistry in that room. India has shown great leadership in getting the community of nations together to agree on that declaration. And the declaration has got many good parts to it. Selfishly, it has a great deal to do with the multilateral banks, which is good for me because it gives me the wind in my sails for me to keep pushing for reform and getting the bank to work better. That's the way I think about it. But I think over the course of the G20, India has done a great job on its own image and branding. And I compliment the PM, but all of you, Amitabh and everybody else, on what you've got done. But I think it's excellent that the G20 has included, 1 odd billion people that belong in the African continent. They're full of young people like India. Their aspirations are important for the future. I think this is a really good move. And again, India should be complimented for championing it. But they got support from the other countries, and I'm glad for that. Back to your earlier question, there's a lot of work going on in the World Bank on the reform agenda. It starts from redefining the vision of the bank to not just be focused on poverty, although it's important, but to also include a livable planet. So the idea is to eradicate poverty on a livable planet. And by doing that, you expand the aperture of our view to include climate, pandemics, fragility, things that we are living through and which are intertwined with poverty alleviation. Very difficult to segregate them. The second thing we're putting in there very clearly is a great emphasis on women and young people. Why these two and not everybody else? Everybody else too. But why two specifically? That 50% of the population is women. Even now around the world, labor force participation at the senior most levels of management, or even their compensation or their opportunities for growth and social development are still not where they should be around the world. This is not just a developing country issue. So I'm a believer that we must put 50% of the population in the center of what we try and do. And the second part is young people, because the developing world is full of young people and their aspirations are our future. But the trick is to give them quality of life when they're growing up. Clean air, clean water, education, healthcare. Once they're grown, they need jobs. You do those two things for them and then they become the engine of your future. So our first part is this vision and inclusion. The second part is to get the bank to work better with other partners, other multilateral banks. I just announced a very big partnership with the Inter-American Development Bank on the Amazon, on Caribbean climate, and on digitizing governance. But then also the private sector, and we've announced this private sector lab. Actually, Chandra of Tata is one of the members of that, but it's led by Mark Carney and Shriti Vadera. And the idea is to get ideas from the private sector, asset managers and operators, on what the bank can do to help facilitate much more investing in renewable energy in the emerging markets. And then the last part is capital adequacy. And there were a lot of announcements in this event. The US has put a lot of money on the table through hybrid capital, but also through portfolio guarantees and contributions to the Green Public Good Fund. Germany put money on the table. Other countries are in conversation. So that's where we are. This is a journey. It won't end in October, but we're on a good journey, and our people are very committed to make it happen. The world is watching. The G20 has got developed world and developing countries. 80% of the world's GDP was sitting in the room. If they would not agree, that would not be a good message. So I actually compliment India and its leadership, but I also compliment the G20 leaders for being able to make sure that a terrific declaration came out. I mean, if 80% of the world's GDP is the G20, if they don't get along, we have fragmented worlds. You have fragmented worlds. That's a challenge for the future. So I'm quite optimistic looking at the body chemistry in that room. There's always going to be challenges. No 20 countries will agree on everything. People have to look after their national interests. But I felt very optimistic by the mood I saw in that room. I'm optimistic also about India's remaining 2 months of the G20 presidency. And then I'm optimistic about Brazil. And then after that, South Africa and the US. So